Hi people, it's Archivist here, hope you're doing well. It's been a while since I uploaded a YouTube video, well at all, let alone a Master Duel video, but I've been playing the game off and on in the background since I stopped uploading, and I've managed to rack up some pre-recordings that I can share with you today, and the theme we're focusing on here is the Winged Dragon of Ra. I'm really excited that I was able to make a deck that can do relatively well online. I'm not going to pretend it's the most competitive thing out there, but what I was shocked by was that when I really got it down and refined, I was getting a similar win rate to my Galaxy Eyes deck, which is my favourite deck to use, largely through a couple of tricks which we'll talk about during this video, and you might see some examples of taking place on the screen. In terms of my motivation for creating the Ra deck, it's largely rooted in nostalgia. I was a massive fan of the Battle City arc in the anime, one of the earliest series, and one of the big focal points of the Battle City series was the Egyptian god cards. These three unstoppable monsters that had so many effects that unless you had another god card, you had very little chance of beating them. Unless, you know, you were Yugi himself, who has plot armor. And there was so much hype around them that if you were into the card game back then, you were desperately searching for them. Unfortunately, when I was younger, I never ever found them. But what I did do, which was a little bit cheeky, was I printed out some high resolution images of the Egyptian god cards and then sort of stuck them on top of regular cards to pretend I had them. And we were quite young back then, so it did manage to fool a couple of kids, but yeah, if anyone saw them in the modern day, they wouldn't be tricked. So yeah, I have a big fondness for these cards. My favourite, probably from a design perspective, was Slifer, and I initially did build a Slifer deck, which got me a couple of wins, but most of the wins were very luck based, so I felt like it wasn't really performing particularly well. So then I looked into Obelisk, but Obelisk, it's hard to build a theme deck around him. He has got support, but it's tricky making it truly consistent in terms of drawing him or getting him onto the field, I found. So instead, I go with Ra. Now, the reason I left Ra for last was because the card itself is actually not that impressive. So his effect is that when you summon him to the field, you can sacrifice all but 100 of your life points, and then he will gain that in attack and defense. And then he has another effect where you can spend 1,000 life points and then destroy a monster on the field, any side of the field, even itself. And the natural reaction to that is, wait a second, if I do the initial effect, I obviously don't have enough life points remaining to even do the second one. And even if I do the first one, it's a real gambit, right? Because going down to 100 life points, if they can use any trick to get behind you, you're out. So it doesn't feel like a very appealing card in that respect, but the support for Ra is by far the best of the god cards, and what you can tell they were doing with it was effectively giving Ra all of the abilities from the anime, but they're just spread across, you know, different spell cards and even other monsters, and I think that does a great effect of replicating some of the scenes we saw in the anime, because rather than us just having to remember all these different effects, we're just playing them as cards. It works out perfectly fine. So it's really fun from a nostalgia point, but some of these effects are genuinely powerful, and we'll go through some of these. So we've talked about Ra himself. So we also have two alternate modes for Ra. We have one called Sphere Mode. Now Sphere Mode requires 3 tributes, but if your opponent has 3 monsters on their side of the field, you can actually tribute those monsters and summon the Sphere Mode to their side. And then, once you move to the next turn, you will get the Sphere Mode back. So there is a little bit of a waiting game, but it's not a perfect strategy in that your opponent could just tribute the Sphere Mode themselves, either for another Ra, or just as part of like a link summon or a tribute summon. So there's no guarantee you're going to actually get it back, but the real value in that is the tributing of 3 of your opponent's monsters. So if your opponent has a board with a lot of negates, high attack power monsters, tributing over the top is one of the hardest to stop forms of removal in the game. So just having that on its own is strong, even if you don't always get to use the ability to pull the Sphere Mode back to your side afterwards, but it's still good. And then another benefit of Sphere Mode is that it actually can't be targeted by effects or even attacks. So If your opponent has a very strong monster, they can't attack Sphere Mode at all, even though it's got a 0 attack and defense. But that doesn't make it indestructible, because if there's a non-targeting effect, something like Dark Hole, then it's going to get destroyed. So it's not indestructible, but it can be a pain for your opponent to deal with if they don't have a way around it. And then, further to that, when it's on your side of the field, you contribute it via its effect, and then bring out a Ra either from your deck or even from your hand, and it goes straight to the field, and the Ra gets 4,000 attack and 4,000 defense. So you get a pretty strong monster, and naturally you can now feel free to use the 1,000 points to destroy a monster on the field, because your Ra does actually have a decent stat line at this point. And further to that, there is the consideration that because this means you technically special summoned Ra, you don't even have the option to sacrifice all but 100 of your life points, which is a shame, because if you could do that, that would be a very easy single hit kill. But yeah, I can understand the balance of it. So it's an alternate way of bringing Ra out, and a lot of the time it's the preferable way. So that's Sphere Mode. Another alternate form of Ra is his the Immortal Phoenix version of Ra, which is really powerful and looks awesome in the card art. So similarly, Immortal Phoenix can pay 1,000 life points, but rather than destroying a monster on the field, it will just send it to the graveyard, which is more powerful because a lot of monsters will have some kind of defense against not being destroyable by card effects, but this bypasses that technically and sends them anyway, so it's got a little bit of a bonus there. But something even better about Immortal Phoenix is, quite simply, it is unaffected by your opponent's effects. So spell cards, monster effects, nothing can touch it. So unless they can hit over it, 4,000 attack, 4,000 defense, this thing is really tough to deal with, and I love it. And I think a lot of my kills have come from an Immortal Phoenix takedown, because what you can do is just, if you've got a healthy number of life points, just start removing all of your opponent's monsters and then go into attack, and it doesn't matter about their back row because they can't do anything to Immortal Phoenix anyway. Disadvantages is that, unlike base Ra, you can't really boost it higher than 4,000 because you don't have the ability to sacrifice your life points in that way to get its attack and defense up. And then there's some really big caveats as well, because otherwise this would be a very overpowered monster. Is firstly, the only way you can summon this card is for a Ra to be sent from your field to the graveyard. So that can be destruction, or it can actually just be, I think it can just be sacrificed. I think you can link summon technically over the top of a Ra, and then it will summon it anyway. So that's a very specific method, because you have to have your Immortal Phoenix in the graveyard at the time that the Ra is sent to the graveyard as well. So to do this, there are two strategies. Actually, no, sorry, there are three strategies that I use. I've got a Foolish Burial in the deck, which will just send my Ra from my deck to my graveyard. Another one would be Millennium Revolution, I think it is, where you can send a Divine Beast from your hand to the graveyard, and then you get a monster reborn in return. Or you can use the True Sun God. So the True Sun God, this is probably a good time to move into the spell support here. The True Sun God has a couple of effects, and one of them is that you can activate it, and then you can send an Immortal Phoenix from your deck to your graveyard, and then instantly sacrifice a Ra from your field, and then the Immortal Phoenix will come up and go onto the field. So it's a great combo, and the spell is clearly designed primarily to allow for an easy, practical way to bring out the Immortal Phoenix. The spell has a couple other things as well. Unless you have a Winged Dragon of Ra on the field, and that is the monster on its first turn being, I think it's special summoned, it cannot actually attack. So if you put this card on the field in your first turn, it can be a good way of protecting your enemy's monsters, from coming in for an attack. So if you don't have a great hand, but you do have the True Sun God, it's a little bit of a defense you can use there. It does unfortunately make it a common target of opponents going for it as your spell card, because it is so powerful within the deck. Also, just you can sacrifice the True Sun God itself as well. if you don't have an Immortal Phoenix in your deck, and then that you can send a Ra to the graveyard. But sometimes I try to link summon over the top of the Ra instead, or I'll actually, in certain cases, use the 1000 life point sacrifice for the Ra to destroy itself in order to provoke out the Immortal Phoenix. Sometimes there are scenarios that is genuinely the strategy you should go with. So another spell support is Blaze Cannon. Blaze Cannon can only be used when you've got the Winged Dragon of Ra on the field. It's a quick play spell card, which is fantastic because you can play it from the hand responsibly, or you can lay it on your field and then, after the initial turn, you can activate it like a trap card, and it will give Ra a couple of very powerful abilities. Firstly, and I think most importantly, Ra becomes unaffected by spells and traps for the turn the spell is activated. Sorry, it's just, it goes further than that. It's unaffected by effects in general, so it almost temporarily gains the Immortal Phoenix ability, but for regular Ra. You can also, I believe, when you go to attack a monster on your opponent's side of the field, after the attack, it will destroy all other monsters on your opponent's side of the field. So you can hit one, maybe go for your opponent's weakest monster, and then the effect of Blaze Cannon will wipe out the rest. And then one that doesn't come up too often would be if you have a monster on your side of the field that has not yet attacked, you can sacrifice that monster, and then those points will be given to Ra. So that comes up occasionally, but I suppose it's most relevant if you've played the True Sun God, because the True Sun God might actually prevent your other monsters from attacking the turn they're summoned. So in order to not lose their attack, so to speak, you can sacrifice them as part of a Blaze Cannon strike. So yeah, I think, again, of those abilities, the best would definitely have to be making it unaffected by players' card effects, because you can play a Ra, give it the massive attack and defense boost, but then you don't have to worry as much about your opponent just playing a card effect destruction to kill it. So it gives you a little bit of insurance there. Another great card, what would we say? I know, another monster that's quite a good support would be Guardian Slime. So Guardian Slime, when you have it in the hand, if your opponent attacks you and you suffer life point damage, well actually I think it's just generically suffer life point damage. You don't even necessarily have to be attacked. So even if they use burn on you, you can do this. You can special summon your Guardian Slime from your hand to the field. And generally you're doing this in defense position because it only has 0 attack and defense by default. But then when your opponent goes to attack it, you can temporarily boost the defense of your Guardian Slime to match the attacking monster, so you kind of negate the attack in certain respects. But it can only do that once, so if your opponent will go for another strike, they're probably going to hit it and destroy it because it's got 0 defense. But another benefit of the Guardian Slime is when it's destroyed, you can do a search out on a Winged Dragon of Ra card, so there's a lot of good things that can come with getting this card onto the field, even if it is destroyed. And you can provoke that through other ways. A great fusion monster you want to play with this would be Egyptian God Slime, which is kind of like a weird metallic version of Obelisk the Tormentor, but it works perfectly fine here. So with the Egyptian God Slime, we don't need polymerization to summon this card. We can actually bring it out directly from the extra deck. We just need an Aqua monster with 0 attack, and then we can directly bring it on top into our field. And the Guardian Slime goes to the graveyard. That gives us a Sphere mode. We can then use the Egyptian God Slime to count as free tributes for our Sphere mode. And then we summon the Sphere mode, and then we activate Sphere mode's effect to bring out the Winged Dragon of Ra. So a nice little combo there. And that's the thing about the deck. While there are some nice reliable combos, nothing goes on too long. And that's something I've begun to realise I do prefer. I don't like decks that have very long string combos. I have got a couple, in my deck repertoire, but what I've learned from them is firstly, they just get boring to play because you have to go through the same sequence every time, and secondly, you do just get players who will quit, and almost understandably so, once your combo goes on long enough, because even if your field isn't that formidable, it can legit just get boring. So I love that the Winged Dragon of Ra deck is it's fairly consistent, but also not too egregious in terms of the combos within the deck. So leaving my favourite strategy for last, and it really is wonderfully simple, is the spell card Soul Crossing. So Soul Crossing allows you to tribute monsters on either side of the field in order to summon a divine beast. So we can use this for sphere mode, or we can use this for the Winged Dragon of Ra itself. That's very powerful in its own right. You can use it to play the card and then tribute 3 of your opponent's monsters and then bring out a powerful Ra or sphere mode in its place. Very good just for that alone. But what I particularly like to do if I can manage it, and this is more of a going first tactic I suppose, is to set my Soul Crossing on the field. Because it's a quick play, I can activate it during my opponent's turn. And what I do is I let them summon a bunch of monsters, and then once they get to like close to the end of their combo, so you do have to be somewhat aware of that, or maybe even just wait for them to attack, then I activate Soul Crossing and tribute 3 of their monsters, and ideally throw a sphere mode down on my side of the field, so I'm both devastating their side but also protecting myself in one go. So if they don't, find any way of stopping that, it truly is devastating. Again, like we said with just the raw effect of sphere mode, tributing your opponent's monsters is one of the most effective means of removal. It's not unheard of having tribute protection, but it is like very, very rare. So it can take out some of the toughest monsters in the game so easily, and you get something for it as well. It's crazy how simple it is as long as you have the right cards in your hand. But yeah, I have to... I feel like a devil when I do it, because I can see my opponent doing something so complicated, and yet I'm just flipping over one card, summoning a monster, and wiping them out. Now, if you are doing it on your turn, there is something you can do which can make it even more crazy powerful, and that's if you've used Ancient Chant to bring Ra to your hand. So if you play Ancient Chant, the initial effect is you can bring a Ra from your deck or even your graveyard to your hand. Nice and simple. But then if you banish your Ancient Chant from your graveyard, the effect becomes that when you bring out your Winged Dragon of Ra this turn, it will gain the combined attack and defense of the monsters you tributed. Now normally this isn't super effective because you're using this for something like Ra's Disciple, so big deal, it gets 3,300 attack, yeah, it's not too much. But your opponent might have some very strong monsters. I mean, just to create a fantasy scenario, right? Your opponent has 3 Blue Eyes White dragons staring you down. You use Soul Crossing to sacrifice them. Your Ra now has 9,000 attack, and you can still boost it if you want. That's the crazy thing, you can still boost it on top of that. So that's a great combination with Soul Crossing as well. So yeah, Soul Crossing, I've just got some of my craziest wins with that card, and it really is deeply formidable. So yeah, if there's any card in the deck and you're trying to make a God card deck, Soul Crossing is an absolute no-brainer. So those would be the core aspects of the Ra deck that I've got. There are some other tricks, but I'm not going into complete detail here. Maybe I'll do that in a future video, but I just wanted to, well, first of all, make a video to return a little bit and give an overview of why I've been enjoying the Ra deck. I think it's a really great combination of nostalgia, of easy to play but with a few tricks, and the combos feel just right, I think, in terms of their length of play. You're not really going to get too many players who just decide to quit while you're going through your Ra summoning combinations, because they really just don't go on that long. So yeah, what I might do is just display the deck on the screen, from the deck profile, if in case anyone does want to copy it. Again, I always say with my decks, they are not super competitive. This has taken me as far as, was it Platinum? I haven't got any further than that, to be completely open about it. But it gets some wins. It gets some wins in there, but you could do better. So if you're playing this, you are playing it for fun, but you might still want a couple of wins. So as always, people, thanks very much for watching, and see you next time.